The Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer greatly from the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and on the third day be raised. Then Peter took Jesus aside and began to rebuke him. God forbid, Lord, no such thing shall ever happen to you. He turned and said to Peter, Get behind me, Satan. You are an obstacle to me. You are thinking not as God does, but as human beings do. Then Jesus said to his disciples, Whoever wishes to come after me must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever wishes to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. What point would there be for one to gain the whole world and forfeit his life? Or what can one give in exchange for his life? For the Son of Man will come with his angels in his Father's glory, and then he will repay all according to his conduct. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Father.
The stories of Jesus forecasting his passion and his death and resurrection are found in Matthew, Mark, and Luke's gospel. In each of those gospels, 3 different times. What's interesting, these stories are absent from John's gospel. But there's a pattern that's similar in each of the stories. Jesus will predict his suffering, which is to come, and then the disciples misunderstand him, or they say something totally off the wall. For instance, when Jesus forecast his passion for the 3rd time in Matthew's Gospel in chapter 20, no sooner than he talks about this horrible, painful death that he's going to endure, the mother of James and John, 2 of the apostles who have just heard Jesus speak, come up on James and John's behalf. Rather than have the courage to come themselves, they send Mommy to ask a favor from Jesus. And the favor? Guarantee that my boys will sit at your right and your left in your kingdom. She wants her boys to have big jobs, to be big potatoes in the kingdom of God. But they make their request right after Jesus predicted his death. For goodness sake, how embarrassing. Well, in our gospel today, we have the first time that Jesus predicts his passion in Matthew's gospel. And it falls right on the heels of last week's gospel. If you remember, Jesus turns to Simon Peter and says, Who do you say I am? And he rattles off the title, You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And now Jesus will predict his passion immediately after. And look what happens. Simon Peter rebukes Jesus. He says, Oh, no, God forbid, you can't say something like that. Now, why did Peter object? Because Peter was like the rest of the people in that they were looking for a victorious, good time Messiah. Someone who would come and expel the Romans and take all their troubles away. This person was supposed to be victorious and to live forever. But when Jesus starts talking about suffering and death as the job description of the Messiah, Peter is absolutely beside himself. And notice what Jesus does to Peter. No sooner than Peter rebukes Jesus, Jesus gives Peter a good tongue lashing. And he looks at him and he says, Get behind me, Satan. Is Jesus calling Peter the devil? No. These words, however, are the same words that the Lord will use back in Matthew chapter 4, verse 19, the same identical words. When Jesus, after having been tested by Satan in several different ways while being in the wilderness for 40 days, then goes on to say to Satan, Get behind me. But notice what Jesus says to Peter after he calls him Satan. He says, "You are being an obstacle to me." The word behind obstacle, the Greek scandalion, means stumbling block. And it's interesting, there's kind of a little play going on in the Greek behind the scenes. Jesus has just got through calling Peter a rock, and now he's telling Peter he's a rock that Jesus himself could trip over if Peter doesn't get his thoughts together. And so Jesus then will go on and give the call of the true disciple. If you would be my disciple, he says, you've got to first of all deny yourself. What does that mean? Pure and simple. Put Jesus first. And then you got to pick up your cross and you got to follow me. In fact, in Luke's account of this story, he will actually add the words, each day you must follow me. So what does it mean to pick up the cross? You know, crosses come in various sizes and shapes and weights in this life. And there's no better place to learn about people who literally followed Jesus and picked up their cross than reading the Martyrology of the Catholic Church. The Martyrology is a story, a historical account of the great saints who literally died for Jesus throughout history. And the stories are amazing, but there's one detail that they all have in common, whether they were martyred in the 1st century or the 21st century. The thing that they shared in common, they all went to death peacefully. Not one of them went to their death kicking and screaming and crying. They all went peacefully. Check these stories. The first martyr I'd like to talk about is Father Maximilian Kolbe. He was canonized only about 20 years ago by Pope John Paul II. He was a Polish Franciscan priest who had a tremendous devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary. But he also had a dislike for the Nazi regime that came to his native Poland in blitzkrieg style in the year 1939. From the pulpit, he preached against the Nazis. In 1940, the Nazis rewarded him by arresting him. They put him in the Nazi concentration camp at Auschwitz in Poland. In July 30th of 1941, a prisoner attempted to escape Auschwitz. He didn't make it very far. His body was riddled with bullets. But the SS captain of the guard was not amused. And so he went to this prisoner's Stalag 14, and he called all the prisoners out and had them line up in rows. And he announced to them that 10 people had to pay for this attempted escape. And so he began to point to 10 different men. He came to one man, and the man fell to his knees on the ground, crying and begging. He said, "My wife, my children, my little children, I will never see them again." Father Maximilian Kolbe was standing next to him. He stepped forward and said to the captain, "I will take his place." And he did so calmly and graciously. Well, the captain took him up on it. The punishment, these men were put in an underground bunker where they would deprive for food. The captain wanted to slowly starve them to death. What's interesting, Maximilian Kolbe outlasted them all by several days, and the captain was not pleased. And so he ordered that Maximilian have a lethal injection to put him out of his misery. "I will take his place," he said. One of my favorite martyrologies, because it can show you that the saints really did have a sense of humor, was the martyrology of the Saint Lawrence. Saint Lawrence died in the year 258 AD. He was the chief deacon for the Catholic Church in the city of Rome. And he had a big job. He was the treasurer for the Catholic Church in Rome. Now, don't get me wrong, the church wasn't built like Fort Knox at that time, but he was over all the money. Well, the prefect of the city of Rome, a pagan of course, heard about the treasures of the church. And so he called Lawrence in for a little interrogation. And what was interesting, he used the words of Jesus to interrogate him. He says to Lawrence, he said, I understand you Catholics drink out of gold cups and you eat off of silver plates. He said, don't you remember your teacher Jesus said to you, render unto Caesar what belongs to Caesar? So you need to turn all these treasures over to Caesar. And so Lawrence looked at him calmly and said, okay, I'll give you the treasures of the Catholic Church. And so they arranged a day and a location. It was a big building in the city of Rome. And that morning that he was to meet the prefect, Lawrence went out into the streets of Rome and gathered up all the blind, the crippled, the lame, and the poor, and packed them into this basilica. And so that afternoon, when the prefect knocked on the door with his guard, Lawrence opened the door, he came out and greeted him with a smile on his face, and he said, sir, here is the treasure of the church. And he flung the door open, and there were all these poor and crippled people. Well, needless to say, the prefect was not amused. He was publicly humiliated by Lawrence. So he had Lawrence summarily arrested, and then he ordered that Lawrence die a slow and agonizing death. And the Romans were experts in death. And so what they did was they constructed a huge gridiron, something like a very large barbecue grill. And he stoked up a nice hot fire. It was red hot. And they put Lawrence on that grill. And then a couple hours later, presuming that Lawrence was dead, he had one of the guards poke him with a stick. Are you ready for this? Eyewitness account. He opened his eyes, got a smile on his face, and said, and I quote, "You can turn me over now, sir. I'm done on this side." The prefect was not amused, and so he ordered that a spear be run through Lawrence's heart to finish him off. My question is this: How could all of these martyrs, men, women, children, elderly, young, how could they go to their deaths calmly, peacefully, and even in Lawrence's case, with a smile on their faces? How? I got my answer quite by accident a number of years ago. I was stuck in traffic, and I always like to look at the cars in front of me at the bumper stickers. Some of them have some interesting things to say. And this vehicle in front of me did have a profound statement. The bumper sticker read, "He will never bring you to it without giving you the grace to get through it." Or in other words, that statement said to me, the Lord will always give you the grace you need to carry your cross. How? I don't know. But he does. How else can you explain that these people would willingly and calmly go to their deaths? So what does carrying the cross mean to me, to you, to us? We are still called to carry our crosses. And if you do, it's going to cost you. If you believe in Jesus and you respond to his call to true discipleship by denying yourself and picking up your cross, it's going to cost you at some point in time. The question is, are you up for the challenge? I remember a story about a young man who was not. I had a seminarian stationed with me a number of years ago. It was the summer of his first year in the seminary. And for some reason, he loved to wear his black shirt, even though he really wasn't supposed to, but I didn't say anything to him. But he paraded around everywhere with his Roman collar on. He was just a baby seminarian. And I remember one Sunday, after the masses, he informed me that he was going to walk to Kroger's. Kroger's was right down the street from the church. And he asked me if I needed anything. I said no. So he took off, and he came back terribly shaken. What happened, he told me, was as he was walking down the street, a car full of girls, as he called them, young college students, pulled up beside him, rolled down their window, and shouted out, "Keep your rosaries off my ovaries." That was a pro-abortion statement and taunt to him. He was so upset he didn't even finish his trip to Kroger's. And he came back, he cried, and by the end of the next semester, he had left the seminary. In this case, it was a good thing that it happened, because if he couldn't handle the keep back then as a seminarian, there was no way he was going to handle the frying pan by the time he got ordained. But you know, I see people carry their crosses all of the time faithfully. There's a woman who was a staple at our 5:30 Mass on Saturday for a number of years. Her name is Chris Klemper. She's married to one of the ushers of the 5:30 Mass, Ted Klemper. We prayed for her for the past couple of years because she's been fighting the effects of renal cell carcinoma, kidney cancer. They took the encapsulated tumor out of her kidney a couple years ago. They thought they got everything, but evidently a malignant cell broke through and metastasized throughout her body. And I'll never forget the trips back and forth to the James Cancer Center in Columbus. Poor Chris suffered a great deal. It was difficult for her. Her husband, Ted, was right by her side every trip, every time. But she went there with faith, trusting that the Lord was going to give her a healing, and if not a complete healing, and then more time so she could watch her children grow up. And I'll never forget her last couple of days at St. Mary's Hospital. Doctors had informed her they could do no more. And so I went to go see her, and she very calmly said to me, she said, "All I want in this life is for my kids to pick up where I left off, to do good work for others that I did not have the time to complete." She never once complained. She never once cursed God. Chris remained faithful. And the Lord actually gave her a very peaceful death. What an incredible cross to carry. But she carried it with holiness and dignity and humility and faith. How did she get all of that? Well, the Lord gives you that grace when you need it. Our teenagers and young adults, I worry about them all the time because, as you all know, our streets, our schools, our communities are polluted with drugs and alcohol and everything else. And you know, it's tough on our young people to get through that. Peer pressure is incredible. It really is like a cancer affecting our young people, and it affects adults as well. But for kids, the pressure to use drugs, to use alcohol, to smoke, to have premarital sex, and those kind of things, it's very, very strong. And unfortunately, only a minority can survive it. Many of the kids fall. Many pick up their feet and move on. But there are some who succumb to it all and end up addicted for the rest of their lives. What do you do to carry a cross like that? Well, God gives you the grace for sure. And what you need to do if you are parents and grandparents and you're worried about your young people, go to the website of the Family Research Council. You will be shocked at what you see in terms of the results of their research. Here's what they discovered. A family where two parents live at home and attend church regularly, those children are minimally affected by drugs and alcohol and premarital sex. In fact, they go even further. They tend rarely to be bullies at school. They tend rarely to get into fights at school. And from the positive angle, they excel academically. Sounds like a too hard to believe easy pill, doesn't it? But you know, there was a little old priest back in the 1950s, Father Peyton, who said, and I quote, "The family that prays together stays together." My brothers and sisters, you go check out the research. You will be shocked. So if God's giving you the grace to help your young person, to keep them from succumbing to peer pressure and the use of drugs and alcohol by coming to church as a family regularly, only a fool would pass that grace up. You can carry that cross faithfully. Now, my brothers and sisters, as I say, crosses come in various sizes and shapes and weights. We all will carry the cross if we say we believe in Jesus. At some point in time, it's going to cost you. It could be something as simple as the negativity you get from coworkers or classmates when you choose to walk away from gossip. They look at you and laugh at you and call you a goody two-shoes because you will not pollute your lips with negative talk about another individual. It's going to cost you. But remember that bumper sticker. He will never bring you to it without giving you the grace to get through it. My brothers and sisters, I don't know exactly when or how that grace comes, but what I do know, and the martyrs throughout history have proven it, God gives you that grace. So, let us pray in a very special way for the grace to pick up our crosses. They will come to us. If you believe in Jesus, I promise you. But let us pray, rather than fall with the cross, we may carry it carefully, faithfully, and humbly behind Jesus, who carried the cross first.